Hi everyone, welcome back to Stefan Livera podcast, brought to you by Swan Bitcoin. Over at swan.com, there's free buys on Bitcoin on your first $10,000 of buys. Joining me today is Tiero from Ark Labs. Now, Tiero is his nickname, Marco is his actual name, but he's probably known as Tiero in the Bitcoin world. So Tiero, do you want to just, welcome to the show and give us a bit of a background on yourself, just so people know, for people who don't know you?
Stefan, first of all, I'm honored to be here, really. I've been following the show for many years, and yes, I'm really, really excited to be here. I've been working in the Bitcoin space for a while. When I was 18 years old, I created one of the first Bitcoin Cash brokerage in the north of Italy. We put one of the first Bitcoin ATM in 2013, and from there, I started, working in the industry, and I did many things. In 2017, we co-founded Whoop Ventures, which is this like venture builder and R&D lab with, an investment wing. So yeah, and now I'm super excited to be here and talk about Ark and talk about Ark Labs.
Great. So yeah, as I know you have a very technical background and you've been around Bitcoin for a while, so you kind of are very technically familiar with a lot of these things. So we can kind of get into some of the detail and explain some of this. So now, I do have an earlier episode on Ark, but it's probably a good thing to just kind of walk through very basic level for the non-technical listener. Do you mind just giving us a bit of an overview to Ark kind of as it is today?
Sure, absolutely. I really think that the best way to have an intuition of what Ark is and what's the approach is really looking at if it was a bank, a trustless bank. So this trustless bank is issuing to you a VTXO, which, in normal terms, it is like a bank check, but with an expiration, which means that every time you want to, transact with someone else inside of this trustless bank, you need to, take your check and ask to the coordinator to create a new check for someone else. And the interesting part is like this check allow you to get your money on Bitcoin on chain every time, even if this coordinator, even if this bank disappear. So I think this is the important caveat, and the expiration is part of the protocol to allow an efficient liquidity for the bank itself. But yes, I think this is really like the ELI5, better that you can get in terms of like trying to get an intuition what it is.
Yeah, gotcha. So in simple terms, it's a way to send a virtual UTXO, right, a VTXO around, and you need an ASP, an Ark service provider, or I guess the coordinator as well. It kind of plays both roles. And the idea you're saying is that there might be multiple ASPs out there. The user might have, a different app that kind of deals with it. And it's, I guess, the idea, and in terms of the main benefit, right, before we get into the technicals, the main benefit, as I understand, is that people can onboard without having to onboard into a Lightning channel, right? Because in Lightning, if I want to open a channel with you, or let's say I'm a noob and you're trying to onboard me, you have to either open a channel to me, or I need to someone has to open a channel to me. And that's currently today, an LSP is doing that with what's called a just-in-time channel, but that requires hitting the chain. And so I guess the idea is you can have a kind of off-chain onboarding per se, but I still have something that I can claim on-chain if I need to. What do you think?
100%. And I think the important piece is that Ark as a protocol has been designed for the last mile, where, as you can imagine, you go on the street, you find someone else, and you convince them to accept Bitcoin. In 2013, I was doing this. I was going to every shop, every merchant, and I was convincing them to, download a simple wallet at the time, non-custodial for Bitcoin, and boom, I sent $1 worth of Bitcoin. The fees were very cheap, so I think that at that time was possible, but it was super easy to onboard a new participant in Bitcoin. With Lightning, the things start becoming more complicated because you have a leaky abstraction basically, right? So you need to explain many things to low-level things to people, like inbound liquidity is one of the most controversial thing to explain. For example, hey, I'm sending you $1, but why 90 cents have been, deducted to what I receive? You told me Bitcoin is fast and cheap, right? So I think it's very hard on that side. And in general, yes, allow you to receive offline, and you don't need to be online. You don't need to be a server. You can be a light light wallet, and this is very important for lowering the barrier for everybody to enter at the beginning. So I think yes, this is totally correct.
Yeah. Okay. And so taking it maybe one step more complexity, let's think of it like this: that your wallet. So let's say the end user has his wallet on his phone that's like an Ark wallet or something. His wallet is going to receive this VTXO, and it needs to periodically watch what's happening, right? To understand that you're not getting stolen from or whatever. But you've set that up on is it like a 1 month cycle, or what kind of cycle? And can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. I think it's obvious right now to every researcher, but in general to the general public, that if you want to scale, you need to have trade-offs. And I think the liveness trade-off, which means that you cannot just disappear. I think the beauty of Bitcoin on chain is, for an investor, is you just throw your funds in a multi-sig or a single sig, but you can forget about it, right? In 10 years, likely you will able to recover. No need to have any other participant to help you. And I think this property is very hard to keep in any second layer you can guess. So yes, Ark is, you have a liveness requirement. I think it's important to notice that it doesn't require you to be constantly online, but you only need to be online for, let's say, very briefly, a couple of seconds before your check expire, before your virtual UTXO expire. You need to be online and say, hey, I want a new one, right? I don't want it to expire. You can redeem it on chain if you want, but the goal is to not pay on chain fees every month, let's say. So you want to refresh it, right? So I think this is very important, because in Lightning you constantly need to monitor your channels in case you need to broadcast your justice transaction. It can be someone else, but you start depending to someone else to have your own funds. Here really is very super simple. You just need to be online once. And if you think about the use case of Ark as a checking account, or in general normal day-to-day payments rail, I mean, I personally check maybe my bank app every day, right? So there is a push notification every spend. So I think it's very acceptable for that specific use case. Again, for cold storage, there is no second best like on-chain, right? But this is definitely not for long-term saving. Maybe you keep having Ark, you accumulate on Ark, and then you can redeem on-chain when the fees are good enough, or you can afford to pay on-chain UTXO.
Yeah. And so can you also just explain, is it going to be a similar concept where, let's say, nowadays, if somebody's getting on board with a Fedimint or a Cashew, and then they want to make payments over the Bitcoin network, and they want to do like a Lightning payment, is it going to be a similar concept here with Ark, like the Ark wallet that the end user is going to use? Actually, when he wants to make a Lightning payment, the ASP is also going to be an LSP who does the Lightning payment for them. Is it going to be a similar concept there?
Sure. I think the beauty of Lightning is that being is really a way for entities to settle between each other, especially when you have frequent, back and forth payment, right? So if you have two banks or two servers or two financial institutions, maybe every month you go back and forth on the same path. And I think Lightning there shines, is perfect. And again, these are entities, they can run server, they can have, DevOps team. And I think the beauty here is like every coordinator can definitely be connected to other coordinators or to other services through the Lightning Network. And Lightning Network really is becoming this lingua franca, to connect all this kind of layer and all this kind of, entities. And that's where I really see, personally, I really see Ark as an application, that is using Lightning 100%. And yeah. I totally think that will look like. So people will use Lightning, will use Ark at some point. They don't even know what they're using. They're just using Bitcoin, but then we are using the right technology for the right, use case and the right approach.
Right, yeah. So I guess in this way, it's important to spell out, it's not necessarily a competitor to Lightning. It's kind of like using Lightning with different trade-offs, right? Because again, as we've kind of established, I think it's fair to say, in 2017, the Bitcoin community made a choice that we didn't want to kind of do this kind of big block scaling, right? That was the choice we made. That's the trade-off we, I guess, implicitly are making. And so that necessitates some trade-offs. I understand, now I'm a fan, a promoter of Lightning myself, but there are times where people criticize it and say, well, see, look at this trade-off you're making, da-da-da, but ultimately it comes back to 2017. This is the trade-off we made. There's always going to be certain trade-offs that you're making somewhere. Now, one aspect that we can probably get into as well is around the liquidity. And, in a Lightning context, if you are using, Phoenix or some, Zeus or Mutiny or something like this, you have to have an LSP channel, right? And so the LSP is having a capital requirement there. Now, in Ark, it's not taking it away. It's just placing it it's kind of using it in a different way. Now the capital requirement is at the ASP level, not at the individual, let's say, channel level. So they're kind of managing, let's say, an overall balance. Maybe it's a bit more like that. So, I mean, before we get further into that, I just want to, I guess, understand from you, has the Ark concept shifted a bit over time? Because I've heard people talking about, as an example, Clark, which is kind of covenantless Ark, or this idea of out of what's it called? Out of transaction or out of something banned payment. Yeah, out of round payment. Sorry, that's the one. Yeah, so if you could maybe just explain some of the updates on Ark as a concept.
Absolutely. And I think the interesting part of Ark is being a client-server protocol. It doesn't require the consensus of every peer of the network. It doesn't need to form really a peer-to-peer network. So every client, every piece of software need to run the same subset of rules. I think this is an advantage because, going back to my analogy at the beginning, you can have a bank that is charging you a different liquidity fee, but not only that, it can have different rule, and maybe even in the past people have read, specific terms or specific numbers, and they are just magical number, 5-second round or 1 month expiration. Those are totally arbitrary, and I think every ASP, based on his own use case, will have his own set of parameters.
I see. Right.
So I
think I guess it's not as helpful to think of it as like one transaction every 5 seconds in the block and 1 month expiration. It's really more like the ASP will tune that based on what they want to provide as a service. And,
Absolutely.
Maybe there'll be kind of different trust models. Maybe there'll be certain trust models where you're kind of like, I know my ASP, so I'm going to trust him more and he's going to trust me more. Maybe there's element of that too. And then maybe there's another element where maybe you don't, there's kind of like less trusting environment. So they kind of have more, I guess, paranoid trade-offs.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I think it will be an emergent property, right? So there will be a discovery phase where every SP, based on his own use case, will really tune the right parameter and the right subset of trade-off. One thing is also important, to notice, and maybe, you're an Austrian, fan, but, maybe it can emerge an ASP that is under collateralized. So he's maybe saying to you, hey, there are 0.8 BTC out of 1. I mean, this is really controversial. I'm telling around, but just saying that, every SP can really have his own rules. And if the client agrees, because in the end, the client has to accept all of these rules, it can really go forward this way. And in general, I think when people talk about liquidity issue or liquidity problem, it's very important to understand that every liquidity problem, is different to each other. Which, for example, if you are in a B2B or enterprise, let's say ASP, so where you're like maybe 20 player doing maybe huge settlement, you will have different parameter and also different kind of liquidity issues, right? So I think that's there will be a discovery process where every ASP will tune based on his own use case, and every community will also form around this ASP. That being said, every ASP can also federate or can be also a peer-to-peer version of an ASP, which we are researching. We're very excited about that. But let's not.
Yeah. Okay. So let's bring it back to some of those key concepts that have maybe either innovated or been discussed. So this idea of out-of-round payment. So I guess my previous understanding was, okay, again, as I said, it doesn't have to be every 5 seconds, but the idea is it's kind of, you can sort of think of it like it's like a coin join happening every 5 seconds that the ASP is putting transactions into the block. Now, my understanding is one trade-off that the teams are looking at now is maybe instead of having one transaction every 5 seconds, we can make that round time longer, but the trade-off or one thing that allows us to do that is to have this concept of out-of-round payments. So can you explain what is an out-of-round payment in Ark?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned before, I think Ark, when it started, was just, an idea. And of course, maybe there were some opinionated, let's say, parameter or opinionated way on how to implement. But as you know, in software, you have great ideas at the beginning, but until you get actually building, you can get very detailed with specification, but I think like the until you are there, until you are actually implementing the software, you don't really know all the possibility. And I think like what have been shown after the initial year of prototyping we've done with the team is really that there are potentially an emergent layer on top of Ark, which we call Ark out of round, which basically, in a very simple way, allow you to just cooperate just with the coordinator, just with the ASP, and say, hey, please co-sign this VTXO to Bob, right? So this is Marco. I want to pay Stefan. Like, please, can you co-sign with me a VTXO to Stefan? But let's not never broadcast in around. Like, broadcast is an improper term. I'll say let's never include in around, right? In an Ark round. And of course, the model here is me with the ASP. We can revert that payment until you, Stefan, don't join the round, because we'll change, right? So instead of being me with the ASP to join the round for you, right? We will simply, send out of bound, maybe on Telegram, on email, and say, hey, there is maybe a payment link, right? So this is very common in every fintech application, right? I send you a simple link, very similar to eCash, right? So I just send you a piece of data, and with that piece of data, you will be able to claim your VTXO in actual round. And maybe you don't claim it now, you claim in 2 weeks. This is very similar to how credit card payments work. This is very similar to all the digital commerce work. You have this concept of chargeback and reversible payments, and I think in the end is not that bad as a trade-off, especially in commerce. And so yeah, I think the beauty of that is like it doesn't require liquidity. So the SP is not really doesn't require liquidity. It's just that for the SP the liquidity will be known. So he knows that there is like 2 weeks. In 2 weeks potentially there will be need for the liquidity. And I think like all the people complaining about liquidity, especially if you came from software, not came from finance, is like it's not about the amount of liquidity, because if there is a reward for the liquidity, people really will rush to provide service. Is not knowing in advance the inventory that you need to keep, is not knowing in advance the cash flow that you have. So that is a very important problem. So imagine that most of these Ark payment will be done out of round. Basically, you're doing a list of requests to the SP and say, hey, there will be that amount of payment to expire in this month. So you need to source the liquidity. So I think this is a very interesting trade-off, and definitely for payments, you can have instant payment, you can have like almost free payment, and yeah, it will help the protocol definitely for more commerce retail use case.
Yeah. Now, my understanding of the trade-off here. Now, I saw Stephen Roos give a talk at this in Bitcoin Soul, and so he was explaining a bit around this idea, and he was saying it's similar to a state chain kind of trade-off. Like it's kind of like you're trusting that the state chain coordinator doesn't collaborate with the prior sender. Is that right? Or what's the main trade-off around doing this out-of-round Ark payment?
Yeah, I think there are maybe potentially two approaches for this out-of-round approach. One is being proposed by Ruben Samson, the shortcut. And
yeah.
I think the state chain approach is a little bit different than what I try to explain, in the sense that you may not have the revertible property, but at the same time you need to trust that at least one of the participants is not basically colluding with you. I think you have both this emergent property where basically if you really want to have a non-revertible payment, you need to join around. So I really see this as a layer on top of it. So you are always free as a recipient to say, hey, I want to join around now, and I will pay the liquidity, right? So I will pay the liquidity fee to join around now. Or if you're trusting the sender to not charge back, or in general the ASP, you can keep it longer, let's say, right? So but in general, that's about you. I think there are two different properties. I think they are not that different to each other. But yes, like there is also the state chain approach on top of it.
I see. Okay. And then while we're here, we might as well talk a little bit about fees. Now, again, this is, how long is a piece of string question? It can really vary. Even in the Lightning world, it kind of depends, okay, which LSP are you using, right? As an example, if you use Phoenix today, I think it's 1% inbound liquidity fee and 0.4% on your outgoing sends, right? And then, now let's say you run your own Lightning node. Maybe if you can run your own stuff, maybe kind of the typical fee rate you'll find is maybe more like 0.2%, but you're doing your own channel open and close and all this kind of thing. So can you give us an idea in Ark, what kind of fees could the end user expect to see, or is it just even too early to even give an idea?
No, sure. We've done some simulation, and that was also important for us to touch with our hands what will look like in a real life scenario. I think in the end, the fees are a function of the age of your check or your VTXO. So if you're spending a VTXO very closer to its expiration, that will be much better for the liquidity ASP. And the other component is how much capacity is left in the Ark. If you have, like, imagine 10 BTC of available capacity, which means that the ASP for the future can process all 10 BTC of volume. If someone is coming and say, hey, I want to make a 5 BTC payment, like in a round, well, that's 50% of the capacity. That should be priced. That should definitely say, hey, I need to discourage you to do this because you are emptying my capacity for others that may need. So if you need to do this, you need to pay a little bit more. So I think that these two components are important to determine what would be the fee. It's definitely not like percentage based like people are used to credit cards, but I think it goes much more similar to that, right? Because it removes the inbound liquidity in terms of like concept to understand for user. It's just a matter of a function of things that he can impact. So he can say, okay, my wallet with coin selection will be more smarter, right? A virtual coin selection will select the coins that are like with close expiration, and maybe I will be wary to fat fingers and a lot of Bitcoin if the fee is too high. But I think this is something that the user can, if you give an error to the user, you can remediate from a UX standpoint. So yeah.
Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices, such as the Cold Card Mark IV and the new Cold Card Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now, you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card. This show also brought to you by mempool.space, the leading Bitcoin and blockchain visualizer. I use it all the time when I'm checking transaction fees and trying to understand what is the state of Bitcoin's mempool. You can search transactions, historical as well as unconfirmed ones, and also see a great way to visualize things across the Lightning Network, Liquid, mining, and so much more. Also, for those of you with an enterprise, they offer a mempool.space enterprise program. So for those of you as part of that enterprise program, you might want to get increased API limits, and you might want to have increased access to the team in terms of feature requests. You might want to have special branding in terms of how your custom instance of mempool.space looks. So to sign up for that, go to mempool.space/enterprise. And now, back to the show. Yeah, and so I guess summarizing then, there's an expiration component to it and a capacity component to it, and let's say each ASP will set the fee, obviously, according to what kind of model they're working on, who they're working with. Are they working with enterprise level people? Are they working with maybe high net worth people? Or are they just kind of everyday, regular people who are using the ASP? And so I guess, that's one aspect of it. And then when it comes to the, now we're thinking about the ASP level, who's going to run these? How many will there be? Do you have any ideas around that?
Yeah, it's of course something that will tend, for obvious reason, the capital will tend to be allocated. I think the ASP is doing two jobs, right? One is coordinating, and one is providing liquidity. In the real life scenario, these two roles, likely they will not be the same. entity, because if you're good with server, usually you're not good with money, and vice versa, right? So I think one thing we are really researching here is making sure the coordinator can be a piece where it can scale to zero. When I say scale to zero, it means that if tomorrow a piece of software disappears in the system, the speed doesn't go down at all. Right, so this is really like more similar in a cloud infrastructure where you have like little microservice. So if someone goes down, you have a new one. So the coordinator is very dumb as a job. Is really just a single point to facilitate all people to join rounds and distribute all piece of information to everybody. And I think that part likely it's a perfect candidate for a peer-to-peer approach, or let's say a more bespoke model, or more like, let's say, using more like encrypted channels, or anybody really can do that. Maybe get a fee just for the job of being an online server, right? Without even providing capital. On the other side, we see who is allocating capital, and to me, unlikely those will run servers. So likely I see structured financial product that, you can create a bond that basically saying, okay, we have, borrowing from last resort lenders, and then we are basically lending, because that's what, I did a talk in Bitcoin Plus Plus about this, but I really see the operation of a liquidity provider in Ark to be a lender. Really, what he's doing is lending to you on UTXO in exchange of some fees, and then you have an expiration, so you're getting back your loan, right? The principal. So I think that's very natural to see where there will be multiple, liquidity providers that are providing liquidity regardless of the coordinator, right? So it will be more complex than a single server that does both jobs. That's the easiest way to understand and easiest way to implement. But as you know, like we are in Bitcoin, either you go BitTorrent style from the beginning or not. So I think that will be the case. Then once you have this, let's say, more peer-to-peer infrastructure, you can build a vertical centralized, very efficient, let's say, server, and that will be something, ASP will do on top. I definitely don't see, especially in Bitcoin, a huge number, right, of ASP, but remember, behind an ASP can be a Frost, like a multi-sig federation, without having a script, just a single, cryptographic, multi-party, wallet with using Frost and any other ways. So really that will allow everybody to join and just provide liquidity without trusting other liquidity provider, right? So it will really be a way. And the interesting part, like compared to providing liquidity to Lightning, right? In Lightning, it's not just, I need to have money. In Lightning, you also need to understand the network. You need to understand the topology of the network. You need to understand where to deploy. You need to be, Bitcoin and Lightning network aware of where the capital is going. In Ark, the beauty of that is like maybe you're sitting in your office in New York and you don't even know how Bitcoin works. You're just providing liquidity. Fire and forget. Of course, like you need to run a piece of software that is doing this, but you don't really need to understand, because as you said before, it's a single place. You just provide liquidity in a single place and everybody is drawing liquidity from that single place. So it's a much more, financial, it's much easier to create a financial asset around this.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, interesting, because as you said, in Lightning, you have to think about which direction the channels are going, where's the liquidity, and kind of where are you want to ideally open channels in the direction that someone is trying to make payments, so that you can collect routing fees, and maybe if you're an LSP, so that you can provide a good service. But in an ASP context, in an Ark context, it's more just kind of like a blob, right? It's like a blob of capital that you're using to, let's say, create this ASP concept, and individuals who are using that, who are onboarded to that ASP or Ark, they are getting these VTXOs, and that's kind of their claim on that. So I guess the other thing that comes to my mind now is kind of, and people have spoken about this idea of thundering herd in Lightning, right? This idea of, what if lots of people all need to exit at once? What if lots of Lightning channels all have to hit the chain all at once? And, in Bitcoin, let's say an average block might have 3,000, maybe 4,000 transactions in it. And so once we start getting to large numbers, that could be a lot of people who all need to hit the chain very quickly. So do you have any thoughts on how to manage that with Ark?
Yeah, I think like the initial idea being proposed by, Jeremy Rubin has been, championing this with CTV at the beginning. I think the congestion control approach is, okay, we know that we cannot fit right now in the chain, But if you trust this Bitcoin script, we can really making sure that, the withdrawal is like, step by step, let's say, you don't go everybody like, let's say 100 BTC all at once in the mempool, but every layer of the tree, you basically you start unrolling in a way, every leaf, you start unrolling in a way that first it goes there, so you wait, so that maybe you will get your money in 6 months, right? You know for sure that in 6 months you will get your money at that fee rate, right? So you're not going to burn everything in fees because a mempool the fee is building up. So I think congestion control is one approach. Of course, the trade-off there, the issue there is the UX is not that great, because for a user you need to wait all of this, and every time there is a delta, right? The out point is changing. So the process of unilateral exit with congestion control is long, and you need to keep monitoring, right? Because your out point on chain are changing every time someone is exiting. So you need the round out point is, so, it's a bit complicated. Of course, we hope that there will never be a unilateral exit, but that's the point of Ark, right? So to have this role that everybody can do at any time. So congestion control is definitely one of those approach. If we can be full whiteboard, we don't need to think about Bitcoin script constraint right now. I think using proposal from Salvatore, with Matt, right? So using
the localize all the things, yeah.
Yes, any type of a code. It doesn't need to be the CCV, right? So any type of a code like chassis for stack plus cut, or any type of of code that enable those type of approaches, you can definitely have an optimistic unilateral exit, which means that you just exit. You want to exit, you exit, but just yourself. And this will be optimistic, so there is a game, right? So a bond game, so you're putting there some bonds, so you're sure. So you want to guarantee, you want to put your word, your money, you will say, yes, I'm not cheating. If someone call you cheating, he will slash you, right? So I think this approach definitely is another way, which is much more light, better UX, just a single exit, a single hop exit, and definitely it doesn't require everybody to enroll. But, again, I think that's the difference between looking at Ark or in general to any scaling proposal with, a full spectrum without being constrained on what is possible. Initially, maybe Ark was a lot CTV oriented because, maybe seemed that CTV was getting traction or whatever. So it tried to stuff, what was possible with CTV, with Ark. But actually, I think if you have a clean design space, you can really do the best version of Ark, at least propose the best version of Ark. I'm personally not in a rush. I'm here since many years, so I available to be here and working on this for the next 10 years of my life at least. So I'm not in a rush. So I'm pretty sure that, all this design research will definitely also inform the governance research in general in Bitcoin without being pushy, right? We have nothing to sell. So if covenants are there or not, Ark is possible today. And with the code, Ark Labs release, last week, it's possible for everybody doing right now. Of course, there are trade-offs. There are, as I said, the UX is not great, but at least it's a way to start.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so while we're here, let's talk a little bit about some of the different approaches and which one requires a covenant, which one requires CTV or TX hash, or which one is possible today on Liquid versus what's possible today on main chain. If you could just kind of spell out what are some of the possibilities today, and then we can get into more about what specific covenants would work for Ark, or what would be ideal for Ark.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right after Ark was being proposed, many researcher, I remember Supertestant was the first one to say, hey, you can do it right now with a pre-signed scheme. And I think he created the name Clark, right? So covenantless Ark. And as I explained before, with this Ark out of round or Rubin-Sampson shortcut, you can definitely improve a lot how it will look like with a pre-signed approach, without any covenants, without changing Bitcoin, without any soft fork. So I think that's definitely possible. I think the trade-off is important to notice, to explain here, is you start having more bandwidth requirement, especially when you join a round. You have an extra round of communication, an extra step of communication. This may seem okay, especially if you're a server. It's just an API call. It's just an RPC. If it fails, it will retry. This is 30 years of software engineering already solved this between server. But if you're a client, you're a mobile phone, you're under a tunnel or whatever. When you're a mobile phone, you're a retail consumer, anything can happen. In my experience working with consumer retail app, in my pre-Bitcoin experience with when you have like millions of requests per second, I can tell you that even just one single API, an RPC API that you need to call, a network call that you need to make, that will double your chance of failure, and that is very problematic for retail and UX in general. So I think that's very important to keep in consideration. Depends who we are building for, right? So I think this bandwidth requirement is important because in the pre-sign approach you need to share not only the forfeit between the server and the client, but you also need to share this nonsense of the of this music signatures. So this is the first. The second is the storage requirement. With covenants, you can, like very similar to backupping your seed, your 12 words, you are good to go, right? Ideally, you need to find in some GitHub, public, open source, the script, right? The unrolled script, but with that information, you can deterministically create your unrolled transaction. Right? You don't need to ask anybody. So you understand this is very self-aware and it's very easy to create light wallet, right? It's just 12 words, nothing more, nothing else. Instead, without covenants, with Clark, you need to keep, like very similar to Lightning, you need to keep all of these pre-signed transactions until the expiration of the shared output. Which means, let's say 1 month, it means that you need to keep 1 month. It's not that bad like Lightning, because Lightning you need to keep forever, right? Your backup, but that's why we talk about toxic backup in Lightning, right? So if you lose that, your 12 words are not enough to recover your Lightning channels. You also need this backups, right? In Ark, pre-sign in Clark is very similar, right? So you need to keep those pre-signed signatures. Otherwise, you don't know how to reconstruct the exit. Right, the exit transaction that allow you to unilateral exit. It's not that bad, again, because you only need to keep it until that shared output expires. After that, you can trash it. So it's a pretty good compared to Lightning, but still, it needs to be considered. That's why, personally, from my experience, but that's the beauty of open source and being open public. Anybody can try and build, but this is my consideration. I think these two components are very important when you think about retail UX, especially if you have less dependencies to any server assisted or any other piece that keeping you things. And normal people are very bad at being database administrators, very, very bad. So if you can have a protocol that is stateless as much, right, as possible, or at least no more than on-chain, right? So on-chain only those 12 words. Well, that's when it starts becoming easy for retail. And the third point, which is very important also for me, is the interactive boarding, which means that with Clark, without covenants, we need to have a specialized wallet, much similar to Lightning right now, to basically do this interactive process to enter the Ark. If I have Bitcoin on chain and I want to do Clark, I want to enter a Clark, I need to cooperate with the ASP, right? And this for me is very important because I think this limited the adoption of Lightning. With Lightning, we need like many people convincing, begging Coinbase or Binance to say, please add Lightning withdrawals, like please do it. But with covenants, the beauty of that, and this will be even true with Lightning, right? So if you get covenants, we can do cold channel. Even here, Ark has been designed around the fact that you have only a Bitcoin address and the sender doesn't know that is a boarding address, that is an Ark address. It doesn't know. For him, it's just a simple Bitcoin taproot, or it can be even SegWit. It's just a simple address anybody can send. Binance, Coinbase. We don't need to talk with Coinbase to please integrate Ark. And that's very important because 90% of normal user were Ark, user potential Ark, people that are using day by day Bitcoin for remittances or stuff like that. They don't really want to have a specialized wallet, right? They don't want to understand Lightning or understand Ark. They just want to send. That's it. So I think that's for me also very important. That's why I think, covenants really gets us, the tools to really be a mass retail
to make
consumer.
It better, right?
Yeah.
So you went through a lot there. Let's just quickly, So let me just quickly summarize because that was a lot there. So What we're talking about in the case of Clark, which is covenantless Ark, there's three main trade-offs, as you said. One is the bandwidth and communications part, which is, again, hard when we're dealing with like retail, everyday phone user. Two, the storage. Just like in Lightning, you got to keep your static channel backup and all the backups, toxic backups, etc. And three, as you said, this interactive onboarding component where if we had CTV or TX hash or one of these ideas, then maybe it would be a more stateless and simple kind of onboarding path. So that's, I guess, the Clark component. If you were to do Clark today on mainnet, let's say. Now, what about in the context of Liquid? Because I know Liquid already has certain extra opcodes.
Yep. I think Liquid is really one of the most flexible UTXO chain out there, without talking about LBTC or the federation, but just from a technical perspective, from what allow you, it really gives you the best possible, the most flexible subset of opcodes, right? So Bitcoin script is at the maximum there, right? So you can really do a lot of things and you can experiment. And for us, it's been very important because, again, this is my approach. I really want to go and talk with user and hear their feedback. I don't want to be in my ivory tower or super researcher. I really want to get my hand dirty. So that's why we have been also working with a version with Covenant on Liquid, right? So we don't want to convince 10 people, right? A researcher, we really want to get the feedback from the user. And, Liquid is mainnet in terms of there are real money there. So I think that's important for us. And I think on Liquid, you can really do all these kind of approaches. And for example, beside congestion control exit with Covenant, and beside non-interactive boarding, which we already implemented and are very, very cool to have it there. I think the interesting part will be also to research, with Salvatore proposal, how to do an optimistic unilateral exit, for example, or even a way to reclaim your liquidity when a VTXO, when a check expires, right? So thanks to this current, we can really try those things live and potentially having some dedicated wallet that is already retailed, really consumer oriented, and we can really, try on and be a test bed for what will be the future on Bitcoin.
Back to the show in a moment. The lead sponsor of this show is Swan.com, and Swan has a mission to onboard millions of people into Bitcoin. I also work at Swan, helping on some educational content for the team. Now, the team have also put out a new version of the Swan Bitcoin application, which is available on your smartphone, whether it's Apple or Android. Now, this app has a really fast onboarding experience. It's now just a few minutes to go from zero to Bitcoin. So if you are standing there with your family or friends and you might have been having trouble trying to get them onboarded, well, try this now. Recommend Swan Bitcoin. And you can do this while you're standing next to them. They can click through, and most of them will be able to set up and do this in just a few minutes. Also, the team at Swan have rolled out a new promotion. There are 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys. So this is a great way to go from zero to Bitcoin, and in a guided and managed way. So reminder, go to your App Store or Play Store and search Swan Bitcoin to get onboarded with Bitcoin today. This show also brought to you by Nomad Capitalist. Nomad Capitalist is a leading provider in terms of offshore tax and lifestyle strategy planning and implementation. They can help you go overseas and legally lower your taxes. As many of you know, I grew up in Australia, but I left. I was sick of it in terms of the taxes and the COVID tyranny and all these other things. And so that's why I left, and now I live in Dubai. But that's not necessarily the place for you. You have to think exactly what works for you, for your family, for your business. And Nomad Capitalists have worked across dozens of different countries. They've helped people get passports, residences, bank accounts, and all kinds of other things. And importantly, it's not just about choosing one place. It may be multiple places. And it may be also about making the pieces fit together in terms of how your business fits with your family and you as an individual. Nomad Capitalists have helped many people in terms of going overseas. And if you're interested, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. This is applicable for people with a net worth above $1 million US. That's nomadcapitalist.com/apply. And now back to the show. Gotcha. Okay, so we've spoken about Clark and Liquid, and then I guess the other alternative is hypothetically in the future, if Bitcoin mainnet gets CTV or TX hash or something, could you spell out a little bit what covenant would be? Okay, so put it this way. What covenant would be the minimum kind of required? What would be optimal for ARK purposes, just so people understand?
Yeah, I think CTV is definitely good enough and will be totally okay. Of course, we have some issues potentially with the fee, and this, I think this is the main concern of CTV, is like you need to use child paid for parent to because you need to set an hard-coded
Gotcha.
fee
Yeah.
minimum relay to be broadcasted, and then you need to bump it with some other UTXO, which maybe is okay, but it's not liked by many people. And again, this kind of maybe yearly reclaim of UTXO spend, and also this optimistic unilateral exit, all these new research field area will not be possible with CTV. So that's why I think it's very cool if you get it. And I will love, and I've always been like very vocal about in favor of CTV, but I understand how Bitcoin consensus work, and I think it's just not being merged. It's better to try any possible solution. And one decision we had with Ark Labs, and we have this dual mandate, right? The first is really stewarding and moving forward with an open source reference implementation, and we really want our implementation to be flexible enough with a single tweak of optional configuration to go from Bitcoin with pre-sign to liquid with covenants, or to liquid with pre-sign, or even one signet, Mutiny or whatever that has cat. So we really want to be a place where people can experiment with all this covenant proposal and see how different covenant proposal will impact of the versions. Of course, this is extra work, but we really think it is necessary. And again, I'm not in a rush, and I think that's the best approach, and also to serve the covenant discussion out there.
Yeah. And so then any thoughts on Great Script restoration? So I presume then, from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like CTV would be good, but not optimal because of the fee inlining problem and the need to CPFP and so on. I guess I should just quickly explain that.
Limits your design research.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly explain that for now you tell me if I'm getting something wrong here, but my non-developer understanding of this is kind of, in developer circles, some of them view CTV as like, it's not powerful enough per se. And one of the reasons for that is, as you were saying, is that when it comes to attaching fees to our transactions, you might need to bring your own fee from outside. Whereas if you took a more quote-unquote powerful covenant proposal, something that has more, let's say, introspection, then you could start doing things where you don't need to kind of separately bring the fee. You can kind of introspect into that output and use that for some of the fee. I'm kind of loosely summarizing, but that's my understanding there. And that's where some developers are looking more at like TX hash, or maybe in the future, hypothetically, if there was great script restoration with kind of more advanced scripting features available, then you could sort of do the fee part more efficiently. Is that broadly what's going on there?
Yep, sure. And that's a main component. And as I said before, it really limits you what you can do. Just CTV only, for example, you can do these optimistic unilateral exit like math covenants, like Salvatore proposed, and it really limits you on trying to stuff in what is possible with that opcode. But you're right. Of course, like TX hash will be the best because it will allow granularly to pick parts of the transaction. But I really think that without say, okay, I want this, I want that. That's not my what I really want. But I think that great script restoration has the right approaches, because it's not like picking names, it's not picking person, and people have ego, right? So that's great, because it's basically saying, okay, we are doing the best version of script, and there's no like someone proposed, but you really like the best version, what Satoshi wanted at the beginning and put at the beginning there, and so. I'm totally in favor if that happens.
Okay, yeah. And then, do you have any thoughts? I guess we've been touching on this, but any thoughts on the quote-unquote ossification? But I think really that's maybe a bit of a straw man. Really, what it is more like extreme conservatism, right? Maybe there's been a bit of resistance, and I think ossification is maybe the wrong term. I think it's just that there's a lot of people who are saying, "Hey, I'm okay with Bitcoin as it is." And to be fair to these people, they would say, look, Bitcoin as it is doesn't need to have covenants to kind of have the whole world on board. Let's say this extreme conservative view, this kind of person might be okay with, let's say, 10 to 100 million lightning banks or something like that. Do you have any thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, I totally side with the goal in terms of like, let's be careful, right? We are not Ethereum, like let's really be very careful in all our changes. But I really think that, especially if you look at Taproot is being done in a way that seems someone from the future came and basically built, the foundation, let's say what we call refactor of, of the scripting mechanism, because we want enable to do more in a better way. So to me, it's like, okay, if we are stopping now, it's like defeat, right? So it's like, oh, we don't know how to do it. So why we did all the SegWit stuff, why we did all the Taproot stuff, like what's happened? I understand what happened in the terms of like people are potentially scared of these new changes. But if you look from, logical perspective, like SegWit, what we did for Lightning was super dangerous. We changed the transaction serialization. And that thing was being super easy, super fast, because there was drama, right? There was drama, and most of the Bitcoiners didn't want the option of increase the block size, right? And we really said, okay, whatever. Like I lower my my radar, my concern, because I don't want that. It's very has been a very dramatic sense that really pushed to huge serialization change, two opcodes, because without time lock was impossible to have Lightning. But I think there we did the mistake of maybe now to take the minimal things and try to stuff a protocol in what is possible with this minimal thing. Because if we maybe wait 6 months or 1 year before doing that thing with the new opcodes, oh, maybe we also need introspection to do better Lightning, right? Time lock are not enough. And I think this is important to mention to everybody, especially who came after 2017 in that period from a technical perspective. It's not that now with Covenants we want to do more. It's just that Covenants is a shame was not there already, before when it was time. And now it's so minimal, so simple, because it's not touching Bitcoin. It's not touching that serialization. So it cannot create breaking in Bitcoin. It's just making sure that, some new versus script may be dumb because people create dumb things. But again, you need to send your money to a dumb thing, and you can really do all these dumb things 2 of 2 multisig. So there is really no concern. If not, hey guys, let's go slow and not rush it. Don't create drama, right? Because that's Bitcoin is for the next 100 years, right? So I totally understand that point, and I'm totally okay with this. If it will take 10 years to get Covenants, I'm totally okay. I think it's where I side with them. Let's go together. But again, we've done tremendous job to making sure script can be better for Bitcoin. So to me, it will seem a defeat now to never change Bitcoin, never add any new scripting capability. That will be a defeat of everything, and everybody should be fired. It's a joke, but it's not what the technical consensus always has been, right? So let's make Bitcoin better where we can see.
Yeah. And personally, I'm not an ossificationist myself per se, although I think the term is maybe a little bit of a straw man. I think maybe really the steel man of that argument would be bug fixes and maintenance only, no upgrades to functionality. But even then, I still think, personally, I'm probably more in I like the way AJ Towns frames it of more like slow and steady, right? Like I think as long as it's safe, right? I think as long as it is, proven to be safe, and it's proven to really be an improvement that would actually help more people use Bitcoin, personally, I would be, I'd be okay with it, but I'm not, I don't want to sort of push any change that's out of consensus, right? I don't want to ram anything down that, people don't actually want. So that's kind of where I'm seeing it, at least. So let's see where people go with that. So I guess in terms of Ark Labs, where things are going with Ark, can you give people an idea what to look out for? What should they be thinking about if they're looking at Ark and Ark Labs?
Sure. I think the interesting part, we have been the last year prototyping at least, and we have been a little bit stealth for sure. But that was necessary because, it was important to really touch with our hands and build things and see how they look like. So we've been super happy and super excited to, release it. And finally the code is open source. Everybody can start tinkering with it, build their own Ark. And that has been super interesting because many people reach out, and has been, super, super nice to see the excitement also. From outside, we were in Bitcoin in Austin, Bitcoin Plus, where I went around with the mobile app with Ark and sending payments physically to everybody at the venue, and people were super excited and say, "Oh wow, you guys are already there with the mobile app." And to me, it was like, "No, guys, I've been 1 year, too much. We should have been faster." But I'm a product guy, so that's why I always want to go live earlier. But it's Bitcoin, so it needs to take time. So now going forward, again, what I said, I think like we have this dual mandate. On a side, keeping the open source reference implementation, total MIT license, so everybody can build on top of it. And the other side, of course, is to build commercial service on top of this. And definitely we have many ideas, and we are talking with many partners in the space, but even outside the space, because I think what we really want for Ark is to bring Bitcoin to outside our inner circle. So the people will not talk about Ark or Lightning, will talk about Bitcoin. And I think Ark will help to do that last mile in commercial service, so we can get the broader, let's say, community that is need of Bitcoin, that maybe now is every too clunky, or is not like the Bitcoin of 2013 that was super cheap to do it and very simple to use. So we want to really bring that initial Bitcoin kind of use case. Of course, this goes a bit against of the store of value, like cold storage only, but definitely, like, I think we are early in that sense, but we definitely excited to do that, right? And I think all the commercial services we are looking will definitely be a Bitcoin product we are releasing this summer, and will mostly cater around to help and be compatible with the Lightning Network. So we really want to focus on what are the early adopter of Bitcoin, and there are like the tinkerers and people that really want to try. And it's very interesting because in 2018, when just Lightning was out, I worked on the first UI for our rebalancer service, because we saw that was the interesting part, that was necessary for the ecosystem. I think now finally we are at a time where we can try and help Lightning, especially in the rebalancing process. So yeah, expect some products from us this year, which we are really heads down working on those. So yeah, I'm super excited to share as soon as possible.
Great. So that sounds good. Let's turn now to a few of your views on some other things. I know you've been in the space for a while, so I think you have some interesting perspectives to share. So on stablecoins, or fiat coins, as I prefer to call them. I know you were previously working with, let's say, Fuji Money and doing liquid stuff as well. I'm curious where you see the opportunities there, and I know that can also sometimes be controversial for some people, because maybe they would see that as like, oh, that's a platform maximalist view. If you're like a monetary maximalist, you just want Bitcoin only and you don't really care about other things. But at the same time, I will say it's hard to stop these things, right? Like now, I don't like the spam myself, but at the same time, there's already things like RGB, there's already Taproot assets, which you can't really stop. You can't filter those. So will there be people who try to build out stablecoin or fiat coin features into, quote unquote, on Bitcoin, and we can't really stop them? So I'm curious if you have any reaction on that, or where you see that going.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought, and this is my personal opinion, that, stablecoin can mess with consensus at some point, not from a technical standpoint, from a financial standpoint, right? So if there is too much stablecoin liquidity deployed on Bitcoin, it can mess a little bit. I don't know how. So this again is more like ossifier. So I'm just worried about things I don't know. But at the same time, as you said, if it happens, I will follow, in the sense that I will not wage war to anybody is doing. And that's why I've been working, especially because I think stablecoin right now is where most of the market and interesting opportunity are. And the reason why I work a lot on liquid in the last 2 years, when I actually work with covenants in production with real customer, real use case. So I think that has been interesting, and 90% of those were stablecoin based. And the beauty of liquid, you have 20 million Tether already issued there. And I'm not saying it seems that I'm a liquid shield. I'm not. But I'm just saying, if you want to use Tether right now, there is there. And it's a UTXO chain, so your tooling 90% will match the same tooling of Bitcoin. So I really see that if you want to mess or try or test build with stablecoin, is there. Maybe you don't like the LBTC, Liquid Bitcoin, you don't like the Federation, but again, you are using Tether, you're not using Liquid Bitcoin. And Tether is already centralized issue. So I don't see why, if you want to use Tether, you need to use on Ethereum or Bitcoin and not on Liquid. But that being said, RGB is there, Taro is there, any other meta protocol are always been there. Colored coins, Omni. Tether was first issued on Omni. So if it happens. And I think the beauty of Ark will be able to scale even stablecoin, right? So anything that you can done at the layer one at Bitcoin level. Any type of script can be, brought at the level of Ark. And I think, if there will be traction, I don't know which. So that's why I'm saying I will follow any of this meta protocol will get traction. I think Ark can also benefit there to at least move all the potential MEV, all the potential, clunkiness with the slow block time of Bitcoin and things on another layer, which again, as unilateral exit, also for your stablecoin. So I think that's how we see it.
I'm curious, more controversially, do you see that as a potential centralizing vector or some kind of legal attack vector that, let's say, I don't know, if hypothetically, now it might be a little bit different with the US government seemingly, like especially Trump being more pro-crypto per se, but hypothetically, if the government didn't like it, or maybe the government went to the Bitcoin miners to say, hey, censor this this RGB transaction or this Taproot Assets transaction, or, if there were to be a lot of volume, maybe the other scenario would be like some kind of fork. People were sort of saying, would the government end up owning the Ethereum chain because of all the USDC kind of happening there? I'm curious if you see any similar concern that could happen in Bitcoin on that in a similar vector, or no, not really.
In the first layer, everything is public. So yes, definitely miners have the capacity to do that. Of course, if you do that on a second layer like Ark, that's at least enough hidden, right, from the base layer. So it will be hard to go to miners that are like potentially findable. Of course, the ASP will then be the next one to be talked. But you understand, like, you are giving optionality to move to another layer and to, spread among many players. So that will make even more harder. But I think also this is another thing was very interesting for the liquid trade-off, like having confidential transaction makes the functioning blinded to what they're actually including. So either you stop all the liquid network, which is very hard to coordinate, in all the world. It has to be really a huge campaign to do that, or, it will be very hard for any regulator to go to find every functionality and tell them, because they don't have power. So I think any meta protocol that don't think about how to, in a plausible way conceive your trail or the stablecoin, that definitely will be a vector of attack for sure.
Yeah, interesting. But as we were saying, in many cases, it might not be feasible to detect what's happening there, right? So as an example with RGB, my understanding is they're using TapRet, which is kind of like a tweak of a public key signature. So how are you going to censor that? Like, it's just a standard Bitcoin Taproot transaction, right? So it's kind of like some of these things are just going to be hard to censor by the nature of them, because they're sort of masked in how they're kind of in the standard Bitcoin transaction anonymity set. Now, maybe there's certain indicators, or maybe there's IP, there's other ways, but it's not quite. It's not just like just censor this type of transaction. It's just not like that. It's not like stamps, or even maybe stamps is not even a good example. It's not like BRC20 or something like that. It's just not that easy to just say censor this kind of thing. So it's a more complicated argument, I would say. And not to say I endorse creating shitcoins or whatever. It's more just I'm recognizing that people can do these things and I can't stop them. That's kind of where I see it.
100%. I do agree.
Yeah. All right. So the other big topic I think you have some interesting takes on is Nostr. So I believe you see Nostr as maybe it's more interesting from like a web of trust and maybe some web interface aspect rather than Nostr as it's used today. I'm curious. Can you elaborate a bit there?
Sure. I was a proposer of NIP 46 last year. When I saw Nostr, it has been super, interesting for me. One, because it's a very simple protocol, and simplicity wins, especially in decentralized or peer-to-peer scenario. If it's simple, it can be run, but low, hardware, by everybody, and everybody is easy to build. Well, that's a good recipe for success. So that's why I was very excited. But to me, Nostr, the social media component of Nostr, was a necessity rather than the goal, in the sense that these social media needs of running this relay, of people talking freely, is basically a way to subsidize dumb server to be online. And once you have that, and for me, I always research about this kind of incentive in my past work for Bitcoin wallets and so on, is the way for you to create an independent network to share messages between light clients or light peers. it can be a browser, can talk to another browser thanks to a relay in the middle. And the beauty of being that if this relay censor you or doesn't accept your message, the authentication is inside your public key, inside your signature. So it's like I bring my own identity. If you're not relaying my message, I'm going to another else. This I think is genius. And this is, for me, was necessary for Bitcoin wallets to create this sort of wallet connect. Right, so you want to have your phone, and you want to maybe it's a browser, or maybe it's a mobile app, and you want to connect to a browser or to another mobile wallet or someone else, and you don't want to have a centralized iCloud, routing message, but you want to have this untrusted relay. And that's why I built Nostr Connect. It was really a way for you with your own keys as a Bitcoin wallet to connect to a web browser. And maybe this web browser will ask you to sign some transaction, which is very popular in Ethereum with Wallet Connect and these kind of approaches. But this will be a decentralized Wallet Connect. And so that's why I propose Nostr Connect. And we are really actively researching on how to use Nostr as the medium of communication, between our client and our server. So yeah, I really see a bright future for Nostr, even beyond the social media, which is a necessary component, which is like giving this, base of a server that are incentivized to be run. Because again, if you're building just a Nostr just for this use case of mine, would be just two server of me and will not be decentralized. But this way we can really have like multiple relayer run by many people that maybe don't agree each other, but they are relaying messages encrypted potentially. So yeah, that's I think super powerful for Bitcoin wallets and the Bitcoin infrastructure.
Yeah, really interesting, because then it allows, I guess, easier coordination, right? And there are people trying to do things like CoinJoin coordinated over Nostr. There are people trying to do, maybe in the future people find other ways to coordinate their PayJoin or other privacy or UX improvements that could come by sort of understanding, I know Tiero's Nostr key, let me encrypt a payment to him using that. Or I know Stefan's Nostr 100%. Public key, I can encrypt a payment to him that way. And so this is kind of like another way that people can coordinate in an age when maybe it's not that easy to coordinate to each other, where otherwise you might have to run a web server or run your own web server, right? Like nowadays, if I want to run my own Lightning address, now, yes, I have my own Lightning address, but not everybody can do that. And so this would be an easy way to kind of make the UX really easy. And there might be some interesting collaboration and opportunities here from a Nostr and Bitcoin perspective.
100%.
Yeah. All right, well, great. I think that's a great spot to finish up here. So let's just kind of summarize, because, again, we covered a lot of stuff today, but the basic idea, I'll try and summarize it as I understand it, and then you have a closing thought as well. But my understanding is Ark is this kind of combination of, like, CoinJoin, maybe a bit of state chain, a bit of, it's kind of, and, like, virtual UTXO, and you kind of blend this all together, and it is a way to easily onboard people, and these people can make all these small payments to each other. Yes, maybe there's a bit more complexity and a bit of capital requirements at the ASP level, but there's a market and people might find ways to make that work. There is some complexity, but again, most of that complexity would be at the ASP and the software developer, nerds level. The everyday users are just going to have an app on their phone and they're just going to use that, and that would be the end goal. Now, it's going to take some time to get there. There's a few different forms, as we've spoken about. There's Clark, covenantless Ark, with certain trade-offs. We said bandwidth, storage, interactive onboarding. On Liquid, you can do it today with less trade-offs, and then maybe someday in the future, if we got CTV, TX hash, MAT, great script restoration, something like this, it would be also more feasible in terms of on-chain in Bitcoin today. And the idea is that it interacts with Lightning, so it's not really a competitor, it's more like another piece to the puzzle. So that's my high-level summary. Any closing thoughts on your part?
Totally, yeah, correct. I think, again, anyone can start getting started right now and building on Ark today. The code is open source and we release it, so we're very excited to see how people will tinker with it. And yeah, new Ark commercial application are coming also this year, both on Bitcoin and both, more retail, consumer oriented. So yes, if you have any ideas or if you want to support the project or help, the project grow, please reach me out. Like, we are really looking forward to collaborate with the broader community.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, I'll put the links in the show notes so you can find Tiero, aka Marco, there. Marco, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it out there with your family and friends. Check out my website at stefanlivera.com, and I will see you in the Citadels.